Hey, we're back. And this is part 2 of the pieces of our past to strengthen our marriage. Just learning and understanding the pieces of our past to build a stronger marriage. The first part, I told you what the pieces of your past were so that you would know the questions to ask and the things to learn about your husband's past and your past to help you both understand why maybe some of your conflicts arise today. And so if you didn't get the first part of this little 2-part message, go ahead and go back and listen to that one first, or watch that one first before listening to this podcast, or if you're watching video, before watching the video. So anyway, just a little background. My name is Kristy Marcotte, and I am a blogger, I am a speaker, and I am a marriage enthusiast. And my husband would probably laugh if he knew I thought that. But I have worked really hard to have a good, strong marriage. My husband and I both, not myself alone. And so we have worked so hard to get a strong marriage. And so I'm just kind of giving the information and the things that we learned to you. And so I hope that something in these messages, the podcast or the videos that you're watching, I hope something will stick and something will stand out and help you. And that's the purpose of these videos and podcasts. So I talked about the pieces of our past in the last message. One of the pieces is our parents. One of the pieces is our peers, like would have been our coworkers and the people we grew up with, like neighbors and students at school, our fellow friends at school. And then the last piece was places or past events. So those two things kind of all lumped in together. So past events, those are the 3 big pieces: your parents, your peers, and past events or past places that you've lived that shape who you are today. And so it doesn't mean that you're stuck, like that has shaped you. You are continuously changing and continuously growing, hopefully, and learning. And so you're not going to stay in this place, and hopefully what I share today will help you understand how to respond to those pieces from your past. How do we respond? So if we had some of the questions that we asked were, how did your parents show love? Or how did they communicate? If it was different in your family than it was in your husband's family, chances are you may think or respond to situations differently than your husband, whether you're communicating differently because you're doing it based on what you learned growing up. Make sense? All right, so what do you do now that you know this information? So if you listen to the part 1 of this, what do you do now that you know this information? So you've looked into it, you've asked your husband some questions, you've asked yourself some questions like, how did my parents show love? How did they communicate? How did they handle conflict? How do they manage money? How do we save money? Like, do we value family time? Did we value, college education? Those kinds of things. And if so, what should be my response now? How can I learn from that? Now that I know this information, I know what happened in the past and those past events and the peers from your past, like past boyfriends, or your husband's past girlfriends, or past marriages, if this is not your first marriage. We need to know, how do we respond? Really, we know this information now. Hopefully you answered those questions from the last message, and now you want to know, like, what do I do about this? How do I now make my marriage better now that I know this information? So just a little reminder of the verse that is kind of the theme verse for all of these messages in this series. And by the way, this is a part of a series called the 4 factors that smart wives consider it to build a strong marriage. So this is the second factor. It's considering my history and his history. And so we need to consider our husband's history, and because that shapes us, right? All right. So here's what our response should be. The first verse that you should look up if you didn't get it from the last message. It's Romans 15, 1 and 2. And it says, we must be considerate of the doubts and fears of others. If we do what helps them, we will build them up in the Lord. And so we need to be considerate of all of these factors in our husband's life for our marriage. We need to be considerate of his uniqueness, which we talked about that in past videos and podcasts. We need to be considerate of his history, which is what we're talking about now. And then in the future videos and the future podcasts, we're going to be talking about being considerate of his humanness and what does that mean. He's human, I'm human. And then being considerate of his value, that he is valuable. So that'll be upcoming, and that'll finish out this series on the 4 factors to build a stronger marriage. All right, so what should be my response? Now that I know this history of my husband, I know my history, and I've kind of looked at it, examined it, asked some questions. Well, our response should be the same as Jesus. We need to remodel after Jesus. He should be our model. And so it says in Luke 23, verse 34, the first part of it, it says, Jesus said, Father, forgive these people because they don't know what they're doing. So many times we will repeat things that we learn growing up because we that's all we know, right? That's all we know. And so it's not that and then sometimes it's not that it's wrong or bad, it's just different. It's different than the way, our husband grew up in a different, maybe he grew up in a big city and you grew up in a small town, or vice versa. Maybe he grew up in a single parent home and maybe, you didn't. You had a blended family. See the differences? Not that one's bad or one's good or better or worse. It's different, and we need to know, how do we make our marriage stronger knowing this information? How can maybe we reduce some conflict, or now we can understand why that argument comes up all the time? We need to take Jesus as our model. That's really what it comes down to. And so the first thing you're going to do 3 things, but the first thing, and if you're able to take notes, please definitely take notes. I can never remember anything the next day unless I take notes, and then it usually lasts a couple more days. But anyway, take notes if you can. If you're driving, don't take notes, please. Anyway, the first thing is pray to God for them. Pray to God for them. Jesus even did that. He says in Romans 12, 14 through 21, it tells us to do this. It says, if people persecute you because you're a Christian, don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. When others are happy, be happy with them. If they're sad, share their sorrow. Live in harmony with each other. Don't try to act important, but enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all, by the way. Kind of like he throws that little thing in there. So we should pray to God for them. And Jesus prays on our behalf all the time. He talks to God on our behalf all the time. It tells us that in the Bible as well. So that's the first thing that you do. The second thing in response to all this information that we've just learned about our past and all those pieces of our past is we don't return evil for evil. So we don't, whenever the conflict comes up and now we know, why, we don't make it worse. We don't, now that we know, maybe it's just the way your husband grew up, it's just different. They instead of calling the couch, as you know, a couch, they call it a sofa. It's not that big of a deal. Don't make fun of him. And, be understanding. You don't return evil for evil. You know this information, you don't use it against the person. You don't go, oh, because I know your sister was just like that, or you're acting just like your dad, or you're acting just like your mom, or whatever it may be. Don't do that. It says verse 17, Romans 12 verse 17, farther along in the group of scriptures, it says, never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you're honorable. Do your part to live in peace with everyone as much as possible. Dear friends, never avenge yourselves. Leave that to God, for it is written, I will take vengeance, I will repay those who deserve it, says the Lord. So, no need to be God, okay? This is not your, you're not the judge in this situation. You are to be a witness, okay? You're not a judge. So we don't really have the right to judge other people. And certainly don't judge their motives. Half the time, I can't tell what my motive is. I mean, I hope it's good. I pray it's good. But you know what? Sometimes it's not, because I'm human. My husband's human. So don't return evil for evil. So we know our history. We know our husband's history now. Make the best of it. Okay? Use it to do good and not use it against your husband. The third thing, and the last thing that we do, is we give them what they need. Something that was missing in their childhood growing up, and now you finally discovered it. You discovered why you're feeling lonely, and there's not as much physical affection as you would like. You know what? Definitely, ask your husband, say, I'm missing that, and I need that. And maybe he didn't grow up with a lot of physical affection. Therefore, he is, and actually my daughter's just arriving, so hopefully the dog doesn't bark, and hopefully he won't. But anyway, that happens sometimes when you're doing videos at home. But don't, hey, waving at my daughter. Anyway, we give them what they need, okay? That means we need to ask for something. If our husband is not normally affectionate, like I was saying, because he didn't grow up in a house that was just tons of affection and hugs and kisses and everything, then ask him for it. And same thing, if your husband is more affectionate than you and you're not so much, give him what he needs, because that's something that he needs. He grew up with it, and he needs it. He thrives on it. It says in the last part, in verse 20 of Romans 12, verse 20 and 21, it says, "Instead, do what the scriptures say. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink, and they will be ashamed of what they have done to you. Don't let evil get the best of you, but conquer evil by doing good." So we need to give our husbands what he needs, not what he deserves, because that's what we want, right? We want that in life. We want to be forgiven. We want to be given grace. And so we need to give that to our husbands. So let this information that you've learned in the last video and this video improve your relationship by understanding what he didn't learn growing up. Maybe he didn't learn how to love in a way that you learned. Give him what he needs. Give him what he needs. You're the new family unit. Give your husband what he needs. All right, next video we'll be talking about, and podcast if you're listening, we'll be talking about forgiveness. And that's the third factor, is being considerate of our husband's humanness, and our humanness for that matter. And we'll do that in the next video. All right, signing off.